Hello and welcome to this COMP3218 video, Game Design and Development at the University of Southampton. My name is Tom Blount, I am one of the lecturers on the course, and I am joined today by...
Madeleine Dwyer, and I'm a demonstrator on the course.
Excellent. Madeleine, can you tell us what we asked the students to do for this coursework?
Yes, so for the coursework, the students were asked to make a small game prototype demonstrating a strong board dynamic and a tutorial level.
Brilliant. All right, let's have a look at our first game. And our first game is Ritsudouken, which I am probably butchering the pronunciation of that, but a very nice title screen. Space to start, turn up the audio. I'm pretty sure my audio is turned up, so let's jump in. Okay, your training is almost over. Time to see what you can do. On these streets, you've always got to keep your finger on the pulse. Actions only count on the beat. Okay. So, first come a little closer on the beat. So press A or D to move on it. The music is pretty good, but I'm going to turn it down a little bit so everyone can hear everything. How's that? So I'm guessing this is the beat. There we go, so we can move a bit closer, or we can move a bit further away.
I'm guessing the pink is it highlighting you getting out on the beat?
I think so, yeah. Although if I just hold it down... I can just hold it down. But it only takes effect on the beat. Okay, so on the beat, press I for a half beat punch. Does that mean I have to hit it on the half beat, or...? Okay. O for a full beat lunge. Okay. Something a bit more technical. I on the beat immediately followed by O on the next half beat. Okay, I think I got him. Show me that that wasn't a fluke. Okay. What was it? I on the beat and O. Oh no, it was a fluke. There we go. You can block with K, but you're not going to be getting hit out there, right? And hey, don't be afraid. So I like this as an introduction. The background is really, really pretty, but it's a little bit noisy in terms of, you know, sort of like visual style. It's a little bit difficult to read all of that text on top of such a nice background. If you press a button, your opponent has to respond on the beat just like you. Do me proud. Okay. I
did notice the space kind of hides in the background sometimes.
So I often struggle to, you know, talk and play these things at the same time, and it feels like this is going to be considerably harder than normal.
Yeah, you have to like focus on the beat and everything as well.
Yeah. Time for your final exam. That was a fast final exam. I punched one skeleton and now I'm ready to graduate. So I can just sort of sit here and keep punching. Ooh, okay.
Is that you blocking? Or?
No, that's me getting punched right off the screen, unfortunately. Let's try that again. Yeah, let's try that again. I don't know why there are sort of gaps in the beat. It feels like there should be... It should be consistent even if there's not a... I don't know, a percussion happening on that beat. And also getting... As with sort of every rhythm game, I'm totally focused on just this tiny bit at the bottom of the screen. So if I'm getting punched off the screen, it's actually really difficult to tell. It's very difficult to sort of know when to move and when to punch, because I'm so focused on just those moving white beats.
Yeah, I guess it'd be good if it was like almost like an overlay so you could see it where the fighting is happening.
Or I guess, I mean, I could just, what's the word? Just listen rather than look. But that feels unfair. He just moved straight through me that time. And now I can't get up.
I think it'd be good if there was like a bit more feedback when you're getting hit or hitting something.
Yeah, or something to stop me flying off the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, while I'm sort of wrestling with this, let's start with the first bit of the mark scheme at least, because I think we can start to talk about that already at this stage. Information design, or rather, the first bit is quality, the first bit of that is presentation, and the first bit of that is information design. So are we being shown all of the really important information that we need to be able to play this game? So the really important bit, I guess, obviously is the beat. And I guess sort of one thing that might be nice to see is the other fighter's intent. Ooh. Oh. I can't tell if that means I won or if I lost. Maybe I actually got him this time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think they obviously told you all the keys right at the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would maybe be useful, like if you weren't blocking enough and you were taking a lot of damage. If it then popped up again saying, "Don't forget to block."
Yeah, exactly. They do a lot of sort of front loading of like the mechanics you need to play. So, which, I mean, I guess given the scale of this game in particular, there's only a limited sort of number of things they can or need to teach you. But it would be nice if, like you say, that it was a bit more contextual. So when we're first told to walk, we actually have to walk down the street to the next person who's going to tell us something maybe. And then they teach us to punch something, and we actually punch a skeleton. And then we sort of do the next bit, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that would have been good, almost like if you saw the punch and you had to like punch a few times, and then they introduced that like full lunge move, which you had to do less to show it's more powerful.
Okay, I almost feel like I'm getting the hang of it now, which I think I may have jinxed. And I think I'm doing partly better because I'm just standing here and not trying to move and just punching. Oh, no, never mind. So, what are the key bits of information that we need to play this game? There's the beat, I guess there's our health. It would maybe be nice to see the enemy's health, and it would maybe be nice to see the enemy's intent. So are they going to try and move towards me? Are they going to try and hit? That would add like maybe an extra layer of strategy for should I block, should I be moving towards them, should I just stand here and punch? So overall, I mean, I guess they do have... that felt a bit fast. I'm not sure if that was a bug or I was just really, really good that time. So in terms of information design, satisfactory is like most key information is shown, and good is all key information is shown. And it feels things like, yeah, feedback for when I'm taking damage, so you know, like pulsing red or like a sound effect or something like that would be quite useful. But maybe the sound effect would sort of overcome some of the audio, which is sort of a bit of a key feature to this.
Yeah, I think...
So I think maybe sort of between satisfactory and good for this. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the same. I think that it's like those bits would be nice, but like they don't prevent you playing the game.
Yeah. Although, yeah. So I guess this will come up when we sort of talk about bugs, for example. But the fact that I can just walk right off the screen is a bit of an issue. So yeah, I think there could be some more feedback about sort of like whether I'm taking or receiving damage or whether my block was successful. Okay, because there's, and part of it is because I'm sort of so intently focused on this bit at the bottom. Like, and actually an audio cue would be quite nice because stuff happens on the beat. You could actually sync up the audio effects to the music, so it would, I mean, ideally sort of layer across it nicely rather than taking away from it. So I think, yeah, they show they show all the important information, but there is some information that would be really, really useful on top of that as well. So yeah, between a satisfactory,
I think it might have been useful. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it might be useful if like they showed if you'd missed the beat or anything like that, rather than you just not moving.
Yeah, so it flashes purple when I press it regardless of how close I was, but it'd be good if it did that kind of, the traditional rhythm game thing of like purple if it's perfect and like yellow if it's just off or red if it's miles off kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay,
so graphics. Graphics are, really consistent throughout. There's not a huge variety in them, right? There's a backdrop and 3 characters, but they're all put together really nicely. Satisfactory would be consistent graphics, good would be consistent and effective graphics, excellent would be consistent, effective and appealing. The weird thing here is, I think they are more appealing than they are effective, because we've already spoke about how, I guess this comes under information design as well, how the background texture can get a bit in the way of the dialogue.
Yeah, I feel like right now the bit that says press space, you can...
I actually missed that. I was trying to sort of move towards him and I couldn't see that I was supposed to be pressing space instead. So yeah. So I would be inclined to give them a good, because I think they are definitely appealing, but I'm not sure actually they're as effective as they could be. Maybe I'm being a little bit nitpicky there. What do you think? Do you think a good or between a good and an excellent for this?
I think probably a good. I think I'm in the same camp as you, where I think they are like appealing and I think they suit that game style. But like it's difficult to read the text, like you said, and also I think the size of the characters and things makes it kind of easy to lose them in the background.
Yeah, okay. So a good for that. Audio is going to be interesting because to get a satisfactory and above, there has to be audio effects and music. If there's only one and not the other, then it's a pass. And I can see why they've not added sound effects, because the music is such a key and important part of the dynamic they're going for. So on the one hand, I understand the decision, but on the other, given that we have a mark scheme that says you should be using both, I feel like they could have tried to incorporate some sound effects, even as part of like the music or the rhythm, sort of as we said earlier, a bit of feedback as you punch on the beat. Because it's happening on the beat, you could find a way of getting it to work alongside the music as well. So the music itself is really, really, really good. But the lack of audio effects again ties back into the information design and sort of this aspect of the mark scheme. I don't think we can go much higher than a pass for that, unfortunately. I'd be inclined to say between a pass and a satisfactory, because although there is only audio, there's only audio, and it's... I was going to say the audio is really, really nice, but at the end of the day it's like one music track that's just there for background music. It just happens to be that the mechanics are really nicely aligned around it. So yeah, I would say between a pass and a satisfactory, I think. And even that might be a little bit generous in this case.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think like you said, there's things they could have done to incorporate sound effects in the music, just for a bit of feedback. Like I think some games, when you take damage and stuff, the music will change, like it will get quieter, or
that's
parts of it might get louder, I think.
That's a really interesting idea as well, actually. I have punched the tutorial guy off the screen again. Okay, so next we're on to meaningful play, so how well the game plays, controls, what mechanics we've got. We have, we've got movement, we've got a number of different attack animations, we've obviously got the central conceit that it's got to happen on the beat, and we've got a couple of different AI that fight us in similar fashions. So overall, a set of consistent mechanics. Are they complementary, and are they a wide set of mechanics?
I wouldn't say they were a wide set. There's quite limited options.
Yeah, I think they could have extended things a bit further with, maybe different types of combos or things like that, or different types of enemies that attack in particular types of patterns or things to really highlight that.
Or even just a different audio track.
Yeah,
with
different
like
music as well,
beat.
actually. I'm just trying to get back on the screen at this point. I think I might be stuck. We'll finish this one and then I'll worry about refreshing it. So yeah, are they complementary? I think they are. I think there we go. Here I come shuffling all the way back. So yeah, I think we hit good for mechanics. There's not a huge sort of variety of mechanics, but the ones they've got sort of worked together quite well. Again, another way of improving it maybe is by having the AI telegraph more clearly what they're about to do, so I've got more control over how I use the mechanics to defeat them, but otherwise I think that's pretty good. Speaking of controls, next one is, what are the controls like? I would say the controls themselves are, mostly pretty good. Again, there's a limited set of things that I can do, and the fact that I am constrained to doing it on the beat, it makes it difficult to sort of talk about how smooth they feel. So I guess it's more a case of how close and accurate do they feel to the beat and to the music, and in that sense I think they do actually fit quite well. There we go.
Yeah, I think like you say, where it's based on the beat, it's not going to be smooth movement like you'd expect in other types of games.
Yeah, so it's more about, is there any sort of sensation that I'm pressing it on the beat but nothing's happening? I guess the slightly weird part is I don't have to press it on the beat, or at least the movement. I can just hold it down. Whereas, no, the punches do actually have to be pretty accurate to the beat. And again, sort of the issue again is that to make sure I'm actually doing it, I can't look at what my character is doing and where he's positioned. So I guess that's the... Oh, you're having a little lie down already? Okay. So maybe a little bit of a bug there, which we'll come on to. So overall, I would say this is a reasonable set of smooth controls. In fact, yeah, smooth and usable controls. I don't know if they're intuitive, again, because of the tying the sort of movement and... maybe they're halfway there, because it will have taken some effort to actually get them that sort of tightly linked to the beat. So I would say probably between a good and an excellent for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that makes sense. I think it's a bit harder for me to tell when I'm not doing the controls, but from what it looked like, it looks like the graphic change at least kind of fits with the beat. So I'm assuming that ties up with the control.
Yeah, it's tricky. I'm actually inclined to bump them up a little bit, just because it's almost got that aspect of novelty that we'd sort of be looking at the prize-worthy. Obviously, they're not the first person to sort of mash together like rhythm game with other genres, but it's like them certainly trying something that's not very widely done. So although I think they have a limited set of sort of mechanics that then lead to a relatively limited set of controls, the controls they've got do kind of have that. So I think I'd almost put them at an excellent. Okay.
Yeah, I can see that. I think I don't think I've actually seen this style of fighting game with rhythm based.
Okay, so moving on to bugs. So we think we found a couple of bugs with being thrown off the screen and the final boss sort of being dead when we arrive. Nothing hugely game breaking, no like massive crashes or anything like that. So I would be tempted to say something like, the game is reasonably complex, but there are infrequent minor bugs. Which would put them at a good. How's that sound to you?
Yeah, I think it's probably good. I think I was probably torn between like satisfactory and good, where like the coming off the screen seemed to happen quite a few times, but I don't know if that's just where you were like concentrating on the ribbon bar more than the actual person's position.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it would be relatively easy to avoid if I were, like, again, sort of depending on the information design and the controls and so on. So, it does happen a lot, but I think that is sort of minor enough in that sense that it doesn't matter. If the boss was frequently dead when we arrived to him, that would be more of a concern, I think. But I'm happy to call that a good, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next is how well they fulfilled the overall brief, which was all about level design and tutorials. First thing we're looking at in terms of level design is the idea of goals versus risk versus reward. So as part of this, all of the students handed in a little report talking about their game. Did they mention anything in terms of goals, risks and rewards in the notes they handed in with this?
I can't see anything explicit, but in their paragraph about core dynamics, they mentioned that the core dynamic is destruction. It's fundamentally a rhythm game, but the end goal isn't to keep to that rhythm. The music is a means to enable and hopefully make more satisfying the destruction of the enemies in the game, which is the real goal.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. That's an interesting thing they've mentioned there, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so in terms of goals, risk, and reward, it feels like the goal is relatively clear, at least. It's move right and punch things. In terms of risk versus reward, it doesn't feel like that is particularly clear. There is the idea of punching versus doing a slightly better punch if you are skilled enough to do it on the combo, and there is blocking. But again, because of sort of the difficulties with the enemies telegraphing what they're doing and not being able to necessarily keep the whole screen in focus at once while they're doing it, it makes that a lot harder, I think. So it feels like relatively clear goal, possibly slightly more limited risk versus reward, which I think would perhaps put them sort of in between both of those at a satisfactory. What do you think?
Yeah, I think where you don't have anything like about the enemy's health or anything as well, it makes it hard to work out why you try and do that more difficult combo.
Yeah. Okay, so
I think like the goals are there, it's just there's not the feedback on them, I guess.
Yeah, perhaps that's true as well. So, I mean, the goal is also not super explicitly stated. Like, we have this sort of tutorial guide where he says, go. I'm trying to remember what he actually tells us to do now. Something about go out there and. There we go. Yeah, we're just ready to go out on our own onto the streets. But, there's a lot of context set up, I guess, in that we're learning to fight and then a skeleton shows up. Okay, so yeah, I think probably satisfactory for that. The goals are relatively clear, the risk rewards of how to achieve them perhaps less so. Pacing. Pacing is going to be a bit of a tricky one because, again, this was only a small game prototype. We're not expecting for full AAA titles, but there is a bit of a lack of content here. It feels like they could have quite easily added more than the two sort of main fights that are in this game. So we effectively have tutorial, single enemy boss fight, and it feels like maybe we could have some slightly more enemies of slightly more increasing difficulty without sort of massively impacting the development time. So that might have been sort of a better way to sort of make sure there was this pacing. So I think we definitely have like tension rising over time. Like we go from tutorial to single fight to supposedly our final exam, although I would almost say that fighting a skeleton is more scary than fighting a guy in an apron. Although he definitely does seem to be a more powerful foe, based on how long it took me to defeat him the first time. But it's short enough that they don't really have the opportunity to sort of demonstrate that pacing.
Yeah, I think it does seem to ramp up from the skeleton to the boss fight. It seems like quite a big difference, and I feel like if they had more almost like levels, more like enemies to defeat before the boss, and also like we talked about before, potentially like introducing new combos or something to make it more complex, or changing the music and the speed of the beat to like change the tension a bit more, like gradually, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, the tension definitely rises over time. It feels like it's going to be sort of between a pass and a satisfactory. It's tension somewhat rising over time versus tension clearly rising over time. Like, it definitely does rise, but it rises, like you say, in such a sort of sharp angle. Well, here's the thing, sort of narratively it rises quite sharply. We go from tutorial to boss fight extremely quickly, but the actual fights don't actually feel that different, is the thing. And again, partly that's because, like, a limited number of mechanics to overcome, and partly again because of the information design, I'm spending a lot of it looking at just the bottom of the screen, so I can't actually see whether the skeleton's doing flips and blocks and all of that. All I'm making sure is I punch on the beat, and that seems to be working out well no matter who I'm facing. So it feels like, yeah, closer towards the pass side of things actually, but because they have definitely sort of put in some thought into that, they want there to be some ascendant pacing, I would put it maybe between the two.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that, because like, the tension does rise, but it's just whether or not it's almost like the right type of rise, and like you said, is it like too steep?
Yeah, and it's... yeah. And it feels like I say, we're only expecting a small prototype, but it feels there would definitely be some scope for them to add just a little bit more in order to have that pacing that we're after. Okay, in terms of the tutorial then, they definitely have a tutorial. It's definitely present at the start of the game. It does perhaps front load some of the stuff, but again, in a game that's this short, they didn't really have an alternative to that. If they'd have sort of spread out some of the things we'd learned. So, you know, we get taught how to punch, we get introduced to one skeleton, we get taught how to do a double punch or the lunge or whichever combo it is, and then we get introduced to two skeletons, and we can defeat them easier because we've had that. That solves both the pacing and the sort of some of the issues with the tutorial, really. Because, for example, looking at a satisfactory on the mark scheme, a tutorial would be gradual explanation of gameplay and controls somewhat aligned with play. And they gradually describe things in terms of, you know, they say, okay, walk, now punch, now do this, but it all happens right at the beginning. It doesn't sort of get explained over the course of several levels, and it doesn't get explained through the design of the level themselves either. So I think we're at yeah, again, it's almost between a pass and a satisfactory here. So gradual explanation of gameplay and controls revealed as we go on, and the same but aligned with play. So they do get us to like actually demonstrate that we can do each of those things before moving on to the step, but it's done in such a sort of environment removed from the core of the game that they're going for. Like if, for example, like I say, they'd had like, you know, teach us how to punch and then give us a skeleton that we can punch rather than just demonstrating in front of our teacher or sensei. So it feels like, again, it's between the two there.
Yeah. Do they actually make sure you know how to block before you can move on as well?
They don't actually, which is strange. He says you can block, but you won't need to.
Yeah, because I thought that was like almost like a little bit of a afterthought add-on, like, oh yeah, you can block as well, but then you don't get shown how to do it, and then in the next levels as well, there's against the skeleton, there's not really a reason to block because he seemed quite easy to defeat. Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of these things where I can clearly see what they were going for, but I don't think they've necessarily achieved it. What happens if I do just block constantly? So yeah, I would say that's falls sort of between a pass and a satisfactory there, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, so in terms of the core dynamic, you already mentioned they said it was destruction, which is interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, obviously, the goal is to sort of defeat these enemies and things like that. I almost feel like they would have made more of the sort of rhythm dynamic. I don't know how they would have sort of described that in terms of some of the example dynamics we've listed, or whether they'd need to sort of describe it in terms of one of their own that they've sort of conjured up. But it feels like the fact that they sort of have this mechanic of doing it on the beat makes that seem like it should be the interesting bit rather than the fact that I'm just punching guys. Maybe if they'd made that, because otherwise that mechanic is almost overriding the destruction aspect, unless, you know, there are certain bonuses to doing stuff on the beat rather than you can only do stuff on the beat.
Yeah, I think if destruction was the core dynamic, you'd expect more feedback as well about like how much damage you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to that information design again. So being able to sort of tell when we're sort of like really, really dealing damage to an opponent.
Yeah, I think if it was like, I think the core dynamic has something to do with the rhythm aspect.
Okay, so a satisfactory for this would be a clear core dynamic that is partially supported by the primary mechanics. And I think we are at least there. It's not like they have one that's totally against it. I mean, obviously, you know, the main thing that we're doing in this game is punching dudes, which is fair enough. That I'm happy to say, yeah, definitely aligned with destruction.
Yeah.
And to an extent, even if they hadn't said destruction and they had said, you know, rhythm or something along those lines, I think we'd still be somewhat around there again, because they've perhaps got a limited set of mechanics, or at least a limited way of demonstrating them through play. There's always going to be some lack of alignment between the dynamic and the mechanics they've got.
Yeah, I think if we went with the core dynamic being rhythm, you'd expect more feedback still about like if you're actually on the beat or how far off you are, and getting like bonuses for being on the beat.
You know, I think we may be being a little harsh there. I think this is probably closer towards the good thing. This is a clear core dynamic that is supported by the primary mechanics. We've got destruction, and the primary mechanic is punching dudes. I don't think it is supported by an integrated set of mechanics, which would be excellent, which we've already talked about. But I think it probably is at least good, and perhaps we're being a little bit harsh there. So I think we say that's actually a good for the core dynamic. You're right, it's interesting that they considered the destruction aspect of it the central bit rather than the rhythm. But I can see perhaps why they wanted to do that. In terms of feedback, so one of the things we asked the students to do was respond to some of the feedback they'd gotten in the lab sessions and integrate that within their game. So what did they say in their game notes about the feedback?
So their feedback, they said, we were told that since our control scheme might be slightly more complex than normal, we should prevent the player from progressing without demonstrating that they could use the controls. This is reflected in how we structured the tutorial, which requires the players to perform moves, sometimes repeatedly for more complex inputs. Continue to the next part. They had another piece of feedback as well, which was that avatar responsiveness would be fundamental to this type of game. So they changed their input system so that the actions appear to be performed instantly, whilst also maintaining balance depending on when the move is used.
Okay, so I agree with the comment about their tutorials. I mean, it's a good principle for any tutorial in that you should make sure your player understands what they're being asked to do before you move on to the next bit. They certainly do that. Perhaps there are interesting or more interesting ways of interpreting that feedback, like we said, sort of teach them how to punch and then give them an enemy they can punch to prove that they can progress with the game. Similar to one of the examples we use is Mario 1-1. You are taught to jump by immediately being shown an enemy that you have to be able to jump over to continue with the rest of the game, rather than just somebody saying, you must jump before I will let you continue. So overall, I think that's a positive change that they've made, rather than not doing that, for example, but perhaps there are more interesting ways of implementing that. And
Yeah.
in terms of sort of the responsiveness and the feedback, again, yeah, I think like they've definitely done that, and it's definitely an important part of making the game feel good, given that the sort of core conceit is that it is in tune with the audio. But again, perhaps there were other things that they could have done on top of that, like giving some of the feedback in terms of audio as well, rather than just the movement of the character. So overall, I would say feedback, the feedback's been addressed and the changes have been successful, which would be a good, but perhaps it's not quite an excellent.
Interestingly, at the bottom they've also said, through peer playtesting, we found some people find it difficult to hear exactly when the beats are in time. So that's why they added the UI at the bottom. But they also have colour changing spotlights in the background, which I hadn't actually noticed.
That is true, they do. The UI that they've added at the bottom I think is definitely more useful than that, but it definitely draws a lot of the player's attention away from other elements. But it is nice that the animation and the things in the background are in time with the beat as well, which I think is a nice touch. It doesn't necessarily... Yeah. So yeah, I don't think that bumps them up to an excellent alone, but I think it's definitely a good for this.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I just didn't notice that before. I think for the actual, feedback to the player from the beat, it's almost like they wanted something between the two options of the background and the middle of the bar at the bottom, so that you had something that's, more obvious when you're playing, but not so restricted in where it is on the screen to, take all your attention to that part of the screen.
Yeah. Okay. In which case that is, I think that's everything for this game, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, and this is Chess Chase. So, nice little title screen, nice little music in the background. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so we've got a set of different levels, which is nice to see in little prototypes like this. I guess we will start with the tutorial. Okay, WASD, proceed through the door to continue. Health potions restore full health. Okie dokie. So that's interesting. They've given us a health potion and they've told us that it restores to full health. But we're already at full health, so we don't sort of get to see the effect that has almost. It would almost be nice if they started us on 1 of 3 health, so that when we picked up the health potion we could actually see it doing that rather than us being told. But, avoid and escape enemy pawns. Pawns move in one direction and can attack diagonally. Okay, I spent so long reading the tutorial that I may be in a bit of trouble, but I think that's okay. Okay, so I saw this during the lab sessions, and I do actually really like this as a sort of mechanic. Things moving sort of in the way that chess pieces do is kind of nice. Okay,
yeah, it's interesting.
So bishops move in this way, ooh, and I really like the way it sort of displays the way they're going to move before they actually do it. We're also back on full health now. I don't know if that's just because of the tutorial, or... So this was something I asked them about in the lab session as well. Why did they decide to have the character moving sort of freely when everything else is moving on a grid? Because there are certain cases, like at the start where we were attacked by both those rooks, where trying to make sure I'm perfectly aligned between them was a little bit tricky. But they said sort of they'd made that decision just because they wanted the movement to feel sort of a bit smoother and flow a bit more, which I think is reasonable. And we've got...
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of in Bomberman. I think you've got free movement in Bomberman. But there's been times where I've been playing that and I think I'm around the corner from the bomb about to explode, but actually I'm slightly not, so then I get killed.
Cool.
So I think it's kind of similar where you've got a grid, but you free movement.
Yeah. Okay, so again, sort of nitpicking as I want to do, it would be nice if there was a next level button here, because if I've just finished the level, odds are I want to move on to the next one rather than restarting or going back to the screen. But, it's fine. So let's have a look at level 1. So I'm just waiting for this one to move and then sprint all the way across. Okay, that seemed relatively easy. We've got a checkpoint, we've got a health potion, a nice little particle effect that time.
Yeah.
So let's just check out that checkpoint. Okay, there's the king. So we could just go there and win. Yeah, there we go. So again, small little nitpick. If actually, I'm going to save that nitpick for a second and just see whether it's. Yeah, so I was going to say, because all of the controls are keyboard based, it's really, really nice if you can just hit a single button and jump back in rather than having to move my hand to the mouse, click on a button and get back in. So that's quite nice. I'm glad that they decided to do that.
Yeah, it makes it more usable, doesn't it?
Yeah, much more. Cool.
Especially when it's like shorter levels, because if you do die a lot, you don't want to just be like moving around.
Yeah. So, while I wrestle with some of the timing of these puzzles, let's start looking at the mark scheme, because I think we've seen all of the key mechanics, and it's just going to be a case of me dying horribly now for the rest of it. I say that. There we go. We're almost there. So first thing we're going to look at is quality again, presentation and information design and all those kinds of things. So what information are we being shown? We've got, I guess, where our character is, our health. We've got the enemies. We've got where they're going to move, which I think is the really, really crucial one. And I guess we've got when we're taking damage. In fact, because we flash, we even have, I would assume, some iframes where we're invincible for a little bit after being hit, rather than, yeah, which I'm guessing lasts as long as we're flashing. So
Yeah, that'd make sense.
quite subtle things, but quite nice for sort of polish, getting across that key information. There's
Yeah, I think the positions of where the pieces are going is good.
yeah, it would be almost unplayable without that, wouldn't it? Yeah, one thing that I sort of touched on earlier was it's difficult perhaps to tell whether I'm, like, for example here, am I on that blue square enough that if something showed up there I'd be hit, or am I perfectly safe? So there's maybe a little bit of ambiguity over exactly where my hitbox is compared to some of the squares, but that is really, really very minor. So I think we're certainly at a good here. All the key information is shown.
Yeah, I think like you say, it might be like a bit nitpicky, but if they had like maybe that instead of it being a green square, it's like a red square, if it's going to hit you when you're on it, and you can then move.
Yeah, that'd be really, really good. So I think we're solidly at a good. All key information is shown. Would we say all key information is shown clearly?
I guess I'm not sure. Like, I feel like the positions where the pieces are going are shown quite clearly, and I think like your health is shown quite clearly. But I think where like exactly where you are, like you were saying, isn't that clear. So I don't know if that maybe prevents it from being an excellent, or if that's like a bit harsh. I don't know.
I think that bit's probably fine. I think it means that we maybe don't go any higher than an excellent, but I think I say this is excellent. Yeah, I can't think of anything other than that sort of one little nitpick that they are missing that they really need to display. Like it's like, if nothing, like it's very clear sort of where the obstacles are. It's very clear sort of where we're moving. It could be more clear what tiles we're on. But
yeah.
There's enough other stuff going on that they're sort of displaying quite well. But yeah, I think that's an excellent. Alright, so moving on to graphics. I would say these graphics are certainly consistent and effective, and actually appealing as well.
Yeah, I think the graphics are good. I think like maybe again like a bit of a nitpick, but the flashing when you take damage, I'd maybe want that to be a bit more like brighter or like obvious, as it's a bit subtle, but I don't know if that's just my eyesight.
Could be, but yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. In terms of just the graphics alone, though, I think again this is sort of solidly an excellent. What would they need to do to make it sort of thematically resonant? I guess perhaps if we were a chess piece or something as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I don't know how that would work though, because then I don't know, would you have to then move
yeah,
like
that's
chess
true.
movement.
I guess we could be a king or a queen or something, but yeah, maybe that would break the metaphor.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess if like obviously this coursework didn't require any like storytelling narrative type bits, but if you had like that story, then you might be able to make it more thematically, like the character more thematically linked.
Yeah, and you know, again, sort of like because we're so high up the mark scheme of this thing, like for example, the title screens, the graphics on this could sort of fit more in with the aesthetic of the other things they've got. So they could be, you know, like stone walls or, you know, something like that. But again, because we're so high up in the mark scheme, we're getting to that sort of nitpicky stage. But I think we say this is solidly and excellent. Okay, so in terms of audio, we've got music, we've got sound effects. So we're already at a satisfactory at least, and I think I would say they're definitely complementary. The music is sort of peppy and lively. It's sort of a good fit for the sort of running about. There's some good audio cues for when we're taking damage, for when the enemies are moving and things like that. For when we die as well, which I cleverly just did there just to demonstrate it. So yeah, I think we're probably again an excellent. Okay. I don't think there's much else to talk about. I think this is solidly an excellent. So the next thing we want to look at is meaningful play. So this is how well the mechanics are used together, how well everything controls. So what mechanics do we have? We've got us moving around, we've got a sort of a health system, we've got health potions, we obviously got the different movement of the enemies and the way they sort of move around.
Yeah, there's the checkpoint type mechanic
Oh yeah,
as well.
checkpoints as well, exactly that. So I would say we're at least at a set of complementary mechanics, possibly reaching towards a wide set.
Yeah, I guess like the way you take the king is like, do you have to take it diagonally, or do you just have to tap the
No,
king?
you just have to tap him, I think. There you go. But yeah, even in terms of, I guess we've got, you know, a number of different sort of like levels and calling, you know, like the menu system a mechanic is perhaps a bit generous, but it shows that they've gone to the sort of thought and polish to make sure things work in that way. But yeah, so I think we're reaching towards a wide set of complementary mechanics.
Yeah,
So,
I think so.
So yeah, perhaps between a good and an excellent for that one, I think.
Yeah, maybe if they'd like done a bit more with the health packs and stuff, because they like, I know there's been a couple that there's not like
or you know,
that many
like,
around, right?
different ways for us to sort of deal with the pieces rather than just running around them, or like different ways of manipulating the terrain to move them in a particular way to clear gaps, or, you know, something of that nature. Like, but that's just me sort of thinking of ideas and things. This is something I quite liked, by the way they show off the king at the end of the level. So we know that we're going to end up there, but we can't get there this way, so we have to follow the level around the way they've designed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it kind of gives you like a sneak peek that you know that you're going to have to deal with the two rooks.
Yeah. Okay, what next? Controls. So the controls themselves. Again, there's not a huge amount of sort of mechanics for me as the player to directly interact with. So it's just moving, really. But the actual movement controls feel like very smooth and usable. Again, there's this little sort of how close can I be to this square, and how small do my interactions have to be to make sure that I can do it. So it's not. It feels like rather than going for, you know, sort of like very precise movements, they've gone for sort of speed and fluidity and flow. Like, it feels much better and easier to just sort of sprint around everything than worry about positioning myself perfectly. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. So So I
Yeah.
think again we're sort of up between the good and the excellent there, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if maybe the thing holding you back from being exactly excellent is maybe like intuitively you might expect to be moving more around like on the grid where everything else is limited to that.
Yeah, that's something that I was curious about in the expo and in the lab sessions. And I think it's also going to come up again in a moment when we sort of talk about pacing, but it definitely feels like, you know, it's very easy to just sprint through the entire level. I say as I'm probably going to die several times in this one. So I think for the controls, it's between a good and an excellent. The controls themselves are, you know, very smooth and fluid and relatively easy to. It doesn't necessarily align with perhaps all of the mechanics they've got in play. Like, it's not perhaps as precise as it needs to be to avoid some of like these tight hallways, but otherwise I think it's a very good implementation, or a very good and almost excellent implementation. In terms of bugs, I don't think we've seen any, have we?
I don't think so, no.
Which, I mean, I think that just puts them straight at an excellent. It's a reasonably complex game, there's no obvious bugs.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any that I've noticed at least.
I am not sure it's of, you know, super high complexity, so I don't think it quite reaches into the prize-worthy category, but I think it's definitely excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next category we're going to be looking at is how well they fulfilled the brief that we set, which was all about level design and tutorials. So for the level design, goals, risks and rewards. Certainly, again, the goal is very clear: get to the end, get the king. The king sort of highlighted in a different colour. In some of the levels we can actually see where the king is hiding at the start, and it's obviously quite well sort of explained in the tutorial. In terms of risks and rewards though, again, this feels like something that is going to come up. There's not a lot of risk versus reward, and in fact there seems to be a bit of a dominant strategy in terms of I don't really have to stop and think about things, I can just rush straight through all the time. So did they mention anything in their game notes about this?
No, I don't think so. I think they've just got their core dynamic and feedback and response sections, but I can't see anything immediately about the risk and reward.
So one of the ways I try and think about risk and reward, for example, is, you know, what would a great player do that a good player wouldn't? Like, how do they sort of demonstrate their skill, like to get, you know, a higher score, or I guess a higher score is the easiest way to think about it. Like, what can I do that puts my character in more danger, that might give me some kind of reward, whether it's, I don't know, like a better weapon or a better score or something. And there's kind of a very binary sort of scoring system to this game, in that you either get to the end or you don't. There's no sort of timer or anything, and there's no alternative routes that are, you know, more dangerous or something like that would let me demonstrate my superior skill to get that reward. There are the health potions, but they're all, like, they're the sort of only, I guess there's only two rewards, right? There's winning the level, and there's the health potions, but they all happen at fixed points regardless of what happens. I never have to take a particularly different route through a maze full of enemies to get to a health potion.
Yeah, I think that the first part of this level, with all the pawns moving around, is probably the bit where I could see like risk coming in, where you could try and go a bit faster to like get through, but will you make it in time? But then, like you said, there's not really like any...
There's no reward for doing that. Right? I can sit here and for as long as I want for the perfect opportunity to come up.
Yeah, so I don't know how, like, I guess if they brought in like a time element, or like you say, having like certain like health packs or like other prizes or something, so it's not just like a binary, you get the king or you don't.
Yeah, and part of that will depend on exactly what they've decided their core dynamic will be as to what they should reward the player with as a result of that. But I think at the minute we're again at very, very clear goal, but not a very limited set of risk versus reward there. So I think on balance that probably puts them at a satisfactory.
Yeah, I think I'd agree.
like perhaps between a pass and satisfactory, even because there's I think satisfactory is probably fair. Okay, moving on. Pacing. So there is definitely pace. Like the levels are definitely paced. They get more complex in terms of scale and the number of enemies and the difficulty with which they're placed in these sort of corridors. I think there are still some issues with the pacing in that the difficulty and the balance is maybe a little bit off, he says as he dies, but it's still relatively easy to just charge through without really thinking too much about it. Okay, again, demonstrating that maybe I can't just charge through completely, but there is still the sort of dominant strategy of, well, it's a bit flawed in two ways almost, because there's that lack of risk and reward. There's no penalty for sitting and taking as long as you want, but equally it's relatively easy to get through it all without doing any of that. So although the levels are designed well such that there's like that amount of pacing and sort of, they definitely do get more challenging as you go. There's maybe some, like this bit for example feels like it should be the final climactic bit, but I actually found this bit easier than the bit with the pawns.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, where like the first part of this level almost seems like the more challenging part, or the level before. But it seems like almost like the pacing in that level is almost like should be flipped. So you go through the bigger area and then have to go through this narrow bit with all the pawns and then get to the king.
Yeah, I agree. So where would that put us for? Again, it's one of these tricky ones where there's definitely tension and they've definitely designed it so that it rises over time. It's just that some of the mechanics don't necessarily lend themselves to that. So I would say satisfactory. Tension clearly rises over time, but it's not necessarily in a coherent... Actually, no, I tell you what. It is a coherent pattern, but it's not a coherent and well-balanced pattern, which puts them at a good on the mark scheme.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I think the well-balanced would be the almost like flipping this bit and like making it harder as you progress through the level, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
But there's definitely that increase in tension, and between the levels it looks like the difficulty increases.
Ooh, actually, yeah, I'm gonna stick with what I said. There's the coherent pattern of we have like a bit of enemies, we have this sort of safe room with a health potion in it. Like that's something I should mention as well. It doesn't just have the rising, but it does have the sort of like falling and a sort of a moment of recovery and respite. They also do some nice things with sort of managing the structure of the level by closing this off once we're here, and the checkpoints and things like that. So actually, yeah, again, you can see a lot of elements where they have tried to design in that amount of pacing. It's maybe not worked as well as they'd hoped in certain areas, but overall I think it's definitely a really good attempt. Yeah, definitely. I think I guess part of it might just be like increasing the complexity of getting the king, like making it slightly more difficult, either by making the king a bit more like formidable, so you have to get him in a certain way or something like that, just to make it less like, okay, I've done it now, because it feels a bit like you just have to run onto them. This is definitely something we're going to talk about when we talk about the core dynamic, but there are two very clear ones they could have gone for this, which is, they could have made it like a puzzle game where it is all grid-based movement and it's all about stopping and trying to work out where things are going to move next and then moving yourself accordingly. Or there's the more sort of quicker, faster pace, sort of just get through it as quickly as possible, sprint around and get to the king kind of a thing. I'm curious to see what they've described theirs as, because I feel like there's going to be some tension between those two things at play there. But before we get onto that, tutorial. So I will open up the tutorial again, just to go through it. So they sort of have, like, again, a bit of a ring-fenced tutorial, but because they've sort of broken up the rest of their game into distinct levels, it still feels mostly natural. Again, they sort of break up the individual lessons into individual bits of gameplay. And I like that they introduce all of the different sort of types of enemies, like one at a time, and you get sort of a clear space to interact with them and see how they interact both with you and the world at large. There are some elements that are a bit... So, we're shown health potions right at the start when we definitely haven't lost any health. And then after that, even if we do lose health, we fully recharge health between rooms, which might give the impression that that happens in the rest of the game, even though that it doesn't. I can see why they've done that, because they don't want the player to die in a tutorial level. I almost think... I want to check something. Did they... So... No, okay. I almost feel like they gave me an extra heart there, but no, I think I was just still invincible from the previous hit. So yeah, I can see why they've done that, but they could have done it by having a health potion at the end of each room rather than just magically granting it, like they do here.
With the pawn, did it say that it could only take you diagonally? Then if it takes you straight on, does it still damage you?
I think just bumping into any of them damages you, but the pawn specifically will move to try and capture you in that direction.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah, I see.
Which, yeah, like, difficult to sort of translate that aspect of chess into this kind of game, I guess. So, looking at the mark scheme, what have we got? So a satisfactory would be gradual explanation of gameplay and controls somewhat aligned with play. And a good would be the same but fully aligned with play.
I guess I would probably be torn between the two, where, like, I think, like you say about how between the tutorial rooms you just regain health, and if they'd literally just put a little health potion right next to where you spawn, you'd always still have the same effect, but it'd be more it'd be fully aligned with play then, I think, where you have to use the health potion to regain your health.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Agreed. And in terms of sort of teaching things through level design, in the specifically tutorial level they kind of don't. All of the rooms are exactly the same, which on the one hand gives you the freedom to see how these things move and interact. But perhaps they could have done some interesting things, like for example, you see the rooks first in a long thin room. And you have to learn strategies to avoid different enemies as well as just being seen how they're done. That is developed a little bit in sort of the main game though. So that's
yeah.
And that's the even though
even if they're like.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, even if they when you got to the king room at the end, if they had like even just a couple of pawns or something, just so that it established that you had the king is normally defended, I guess.
Yes. Although, yeah, so as I was going to say, although like the first level is marked as the tutorial level, you know, they can continue to teach stuff through the level design afterwards, and they do that to an extent with, like I say, different shapes of rooms and different enemies sort of moving through them in different ways. But you're right, there are definitely elements sort of the specific tutorial level that maybe could be sort of done slightly differently. So I think that probably puts it between a good and satisfactory and a good. I think probably at a good, taking into account some of the stuff they do in the later levels as well.
Yeah.
Like you're right, it would have been nice if they'd have sort of had that little checkpoint area within the tutorial, because that's a much more natural way of learning about health potions and things rather than seeing it right at the start before you see any enemies even. But other than that, I think it's quite a well done one. Okay, so core dynamic. This is the bit I've been looking forward to. What did they say in their game notes was the core dynamic for this game?
They said that our core dynamic is chase and evade. In the game, the player is tasked with capturing the king whilst avoiding enemies that move like chess pieces on a grid. The goal of the game is chasing the king while there are moving obstacles on the way that you must evade in the form of enemies. In addition, the main mechanic of the game is the player's movement with no way to fight back. To help the player and encourage them to think ahead with their evading, the enemies highlight on the floor where they will attack beforehand, as well as giving audio cues.
So this goes back to the
not the core dynamics you were thinking?
It was one of them. The other one was, I guess, sort of like race to the end kind of a thing, in that you have to just get your way through all of the obstacles as fast as possible. And in fact, you could even make an argument that you could turn this into a spatial reasoning type game as well. I think of the three of them, it definitely is more chase and evade, because it's all about, you know, evading these things that are coming after you. And actually, I'm curious to see whether they'll follow you into the You gonna come and get me this way? No? Okay, so they've effectively put like a little safe zone here. So yeah, there are definitely elements of chase and evade at play here. We're chasing the king, and these things are chasing us. But I think because like the mechanics of movement are different, it feels very asymmetric. Like we've got, I mean, probably by design because we're the hero, but we have such a big advantage over all of these things that it doesn't feel like we're being chased in any way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I was thinking how it maybe would make more sense. I think when you get close to the chess pieces, they start to like track you a bit. But it'd be to lean more into the chase and evade. You kind of expect all of the chess pieces to straight away start tracking you. Well, reasonably once you're in sight, kind of thing. But it feels like if you get slightly far enough away, they just stop.
I think it's more just that they move so much slower compared to the player, so it's more that they are an obstacle rather than a threat that's chasing you, if that makes sense. Like these ones, for example, will move diagonally to try and get me, but they don't really chase me in any way. They're more of, you know, like almost like a spiked platform in a platform or something like that. There's something to sort of bounce over. These things are coming to hunt me down at least. But I had to stand still here for a while before they arrived, and then I can just sort of run through them all this easily.
Yeah, I guess like you say, it's probably more down to like their speed. Maybe they increase their play speed or like reduce the player's speed just to make it more like closely matched.
So a good for this would be a clear core dynamic that is supported by the primary mechanic. An excellent would be one that is supported by an integrated set of mechanics. I think that we are probably at good. Like, all of the mechanics they've got go towards supporting that dynamic. Like, particularly, you know, the movement of the enemies and things like that. It's a little bit undermined perhaps by the movement of the player being so free and fluid compared to the things that are supposed to be chasing you down. But I can see what they were going for, and they've mostly pulled it off. What do you think for that?
No, I think I'd agree. I think, like, I guess for it to be like the excellent, which is like the more integrated set, you kind of expect,
like, maybe for
example, like the king to move faster when you got closer to it to make it more of a chase rather than just, at the moment it doesn't really feel like the king knows he's being chased.
Yeah, or like, for example, you have these sort of, you know, regular enemies that sort of do just provide a bit of an obstacle. This is actually interesting. They are kind of blocking me off from the rest of the level here. That sort of just provides sort of the normal obstacle during the levels, and then you have, you know, the enemy queen that is always hunting you down and is, like, you know, is much stronger and moves faster and will actually sort of track you a lot better, kind of a thing. Sort of like really emphasize that, you know, you are being chased throughout the entire level. Or, like you say, go the opposite way and make it so that the king is fleeing through a series of levels and you are chasing him, rather than just getting to the final room and then capturing him.
Yeah.
But again, this is one of those things that we're sort of like, you know, nitpicking at because overall it is quite good. So I think we say that it is a good, and we move on to the final bit, which is feedback.
So, their first bit of feedback, they said in the feedback session we were asked what core dynamic we had chosen. We initially replied with spatial reasoning due to the predictable movement patterns of chess pieces. After more discussion, however, we found that spatial reasoning tends towards more deliberate play styles compared to the more fast-paced dodging we had in mind. As a result, we moved the design more towards chase and evade by speeding mechanics of the game up, such as the movement speed and attack frequency of enemies. We also adjusted the movement by increasing the player's acceleration and deceleration to make it feel more responsive. Again, this helped increase the feel of speed. This increase in speed encourages more reactionary decisions in players.
Interesting.
And then they've also got feedback from play testing.
Okay, so it's good that they did some playtesting and they got some feedback from that. We'll focus more on the feedback they got from the lecturers in the labs, just because it's slightly more aligned with the mark scheme. So I agree that this could have been turned into a spatial reasoning game, and the changes that they have made definitely make it more chase and evade than spatial reasoning. If it was spatial reasoning, I would expect, yeah, sort of grid-based movement. It's more about, sort of like almost turn-based. So I move, they move, I move, they move, and you could turn it into like a really interesting sort of spatial puzzle in that way. By upping sort of the movement speed of both the enemies and the player, they've definitely made it more chase and evade. As we've already said, they could have perhaps upped the movement of some of the entities a bit more to really hammer it home, but otherwise I think that was a very successful change. They really emphasised the one that they were going for over one that perhaps they weren't.
Yeah.
I've already forgotten what was the other bit of feedback.
So that was the main feedback they mentioned from us in the feedback session, but then they've also got feedback from the players during playtesting.
Okay.
Which they said that players found it hard to identify which piece was the king. So they recoloured it to be gold compared to the other grey pieces. And then also, players also had trouble initially identifying that the holes in the floor of the level were actually holes at all. So to help fix this, they remade them with borders and clearer textures to make it clear that these were not travelable areas. Okay.
Oh, I see. These bits. That makes sense. User testing and that kind of feedback is really, really good. Doesn't necessarily align with the mark scheme, but it's definitely bits of polish that have improved their game. So yeah, overall, in terms of the feedback that we gave them that they've acted on, I would say the feedback was addressed, the changes have been successful. I think we've already spoken about some things that they could have done to act on that feedback to improve it even further. But of what they've done, I think I think that's probably at a good for the feedback.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Like, they've obviously taken on board and definitely changed the mechanics to focus on that chase and evade.
Excellent. Okay, so in which case that's all for this game, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, and our last game for this block is Roadblock. So, left click to select and place drives... I'm hoping this isn't the entire tutorial. Left click to select and place. I don't know what we're selecting or placing yet. Drives the cars to their homes. How do I drive the cars? And right click to rotate. Is that the cars or whatever? So, we'll just jump into it and we'll see what happens. But right now we have no context for any of these instructions. So these are the sorts of things that would be really good to see once we're in, level 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got... So this is exactly where sort of those instructions would be really good, and it would be really good if they were sort of given to us contextually and sort of one at a time, because now I'm having to remember something from a previous menu screen that I didn't know what was for, but I can work most of it out through context. So we've got straight road, and we've got bendy road, and I'm guessing blue car, blue house, red car, red house.
I would assume so.
That's interesting. So we don't have enough pieces of road to just go straight there. Oh, I can rotate, or I can delete. So if I do something like, and then rotate, 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 straight road, bendy road. So I should say we couldn't get the build of this game working, so we're playing it in Unity instead. But hopefully that should all be fine. There we go. Little car driving along. Congrats. I'm not sure how the score is calculated.
How many pieces did you use? Is it going to do that, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps. There we go. And there's our high score. Okay, level 2. So it looks like this time we have a junction. So they are introducing, mechanics gradually over the course of the game.
Yeah, so it would just be useful to have a bit of text actually explaining that, so
yeah,
that's happening.
And then and then start. Are they going to just immediately crash into each other and explode, or are they going to do something? Interesting, they are. I was being facetious when I said that. So we have to time it so that they don't just crash into each other. So I guess I can do that by making this road longer.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. That's not normally how I see these kinds of puzzle games. It's normally just about can you use the tiles to connect it, rather than, I guess, this extra element. So there we go, no horrible traffic crashes this time. Yeah, lower score this time as well.
Not as good as the score.
But I'm not sure. I have no context for this number, so I think either this needs, you know, like a breakdown of why I've gotten this score, or, you know, something that's very typical of puzzle games, like a, you know, a set of stars. Like, what was the max score that I could have gotten or should have been aiming for?
Yeah, just like something's like
Oh, here we go. So now we have some more
indicate
tutorial.
how to actually improve your score.
Press E on the three-way tiles to rotate the turn line. Hint, try pressing E while the cars are driving. That sounds dangerous. So I'm guessing this is the three-way turn line. So if I press E, it will turn that way or that way.
Also, whilst the cars are driving, will you be able to flip?
Yeah, it looks that way. Okay, so while I'm gonna probably struggle with this puzzle for a little while, do you want to... Oh, hang on, there we go. Yeah, shall we start going through the mark scheme at the same time?
Yeah. Yes, I think the first bit is the quality presentation criteria, and the first part of that is information design.
Okie dokie. So what bits of information do we have? What bits of information do we need?
I think like part of it will be that information about the score, like actual feedback on that, so that you can work out, I guess, exactly what you want to improve for the next level, or if you do that level again, like how you actually make that a higher score.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of pure game, sorry, I'm getting too into this puzzle game, which is a good sign, but it means I'm sort of like giving you all of the hard work with looking at the mark scheme. So yeah, in terms of the actual mechanics, we have the tiles that we can use, we've got their orientation, we've got where each car needs to go, and then, like you say, the stuff about the scoring that's perhaps not present, which is a bit of a shame. And then I'm going to have to flip these around like that. There we go. Ah. Okay. So they don't drive on their own side of the road. And resetting goes all the way back to this. So I've got to place down all those again. That's a bit of a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the information design aspects, like you can see where the cars are going. I don't know if maybe where like you've got the two cars going on the same road, it might be useful if they showed like the potential routes that they take. So you see like almost like a red line showing this is the route that the red car will take right now, and this is the route the blue car will take right now, where they just seem to default to go towards their house. It'd be useful to know, like,
well, I think they
to be able to like gauge that.
I think they just follow the road, so they'll like turn in this way, or they'll like they will just follow the road. So yes, maybe they could sort of do a little highlight showing ahead of time, but it's fairly typical in these kinds of puzzle games to only see it when you press start. That's
yeah,
fine.
I think I'd misunderstood. I thought it was I thought they would do turns by themselves, but you're controlling the turns, aren't you? So that's just me not understanding. I think
I may have overcomplicated this slightly. Actually, wait, can I just build it out of these pieces? I bet I can. For some reason I keep right-clicking to try and delete stuff. Yeah, so okay, in terms of information design, I would say... Oh, in terms of actually playing the game, all of the key information is shown. They haven't shown like how the scoring is calculated, which we've already talked about a little bit. Which I think would be quite helpful and useful. But overall, to actually solve the puzzles, I think everything they need is there. Yeah. Damn, I almost had it there.
You can make it on a circle route.
Yes, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah, so I think I'd agree. I think like the lack of information is probably just in that how to improve your score. But during the actual gameplay, I think you seem to have all the information you need, and like when you run out of a specific type of block, does it like grey out or something like that, right? So then it shows you that you've
and like when you've got one selected as well, and then so it doesn't grey out when it's run out, but you know they've got a count of them, so that's something. Okay, so overall I'm going to try and not get distracted with puzzles this time. I would say we call this a good. So I don't think I think again it's one of these things where it's a bit split, right? All of the information needed to play the game is shown, and shown clearly. However, not all information, I guess, sort of. Hang on, let me get this right. All the information needed to solve the puzzles is shown and shown clearly, but not all of the information needed to sort of play the game is shown clearly. So I think we call that a good. And then move on before I get too sidetracked into puzzles again. Graphics. Graphics are, I would say, consistent, effective, appealing. It's very easy to see, you know, what's an obstacle, what's a road piece. Like,
I think it's quite obvious which house the cars correspond to, like colour-wise and everything.
Like, it's a relatively simple set of graphics, but for sort of puzzle games like this, that's kind of what you want rather than overcomplicating things. So I would say, simple, effective and appealing. Or rather, consistent, effective and appealing, which would be an excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so audio. So there is some lovely background music. There's like a nice satisfying little click every time you put down a tile, and a little swoosh when you rotate stuff. Again, like, really simple but really effective. There's nothing else extra like you need to add to that other than I don't know. I'm trying to think how again you could sort of make it more thematic in terms of the mark scheme though. Complementary and appealing effects of music. I think we're easily there, which puts it in an excellent. Sophisticated, complementary. Is it complementary and appealing? How else could we add it? Honestly, I think it might be nudging its way to praiseworthy. Like, it's... I'm struggling to think of what else could be added.
They're like
interesting. I can delete.
It's actually running.
There's
so if you delete the
little car noises, so I can actually delete the tiles they start on, which I'm guessing is one of these things that's technically a bug, but also technically a feature.
Yeah. I think is there like a crash noise as well?
There is. Yeah. So I'd almost put this between an excellent and a praiseworthy. Right. Meaningful play mechanics. So we certainly have a set of consistent mechanics. I think we have a set of complementary mechanics. Would we say there is a wide set of mechanics? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip to level 10 and just see what extra tiles and pieces that we've got added. Okay, so no extra tile pieces, but we do have an extra car and extra levels and things. So in terms of mechanics, we've got the cars follow specific routes. We've got placing down those routes. We've got rotating things. We've got swapping the direction of things, which is slightly different to rotating, but not quite. And we've got just sort of...
I guess you have to do it in when the cars are going as well, so that adds to it.
So I would say it's reaching towards a wide set. There's perhaps, again, like as with most of these things, there's always stuff you could add on top of it. Like, you know, like, I don't know, a traffic light tile or something, or a one-way tile or something like that. But certainly, like, the building blocks of things they've got here are, like, very, very effective and very, very complementary. So I would put this, I think, between a good and an excellent.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Like, everything makes sense. Like, all the mechanics kind of make sense for the game is, and think they're the right complexity, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. It would be nice if, you know, it remembered like the rotation of tiles or something like that, or I could click and drag just to make life a little bit easier. But, you know, that's sort of wishlist stuff at this point. So yeah, I would say between a good and an excellent feels about right for that. Okay, which moves us on to controls. Yeah, overall controls are really, really easy to use. I keep getting confused between rotate and delete. I don't know why that. Maybe I'm just used to games that sort of have like a right click to delete rather than rotate. Maybe I think I keep sort of wanting to press R to rotate, but that's more my muscle memory than their choices. So I would say, yeah, certainly a reasonable set of smooth and usable controls. I don't know whether again they hit that intuitive because there's the sort of the difference between the, like, there's E to sort of rotate the turn, but then right click to rotate the tile. Like, is a little bit tricky to get a head around, but other than that, I think this is probably between a good and an excellent again.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's good that the majority of the controls when you're building it seem to be mouse based, but then like, you don't have to like flick between mouse and keyboard too much if you are playing one-handed or anything like that. It means it's, to me, that just seems like it'd be more intuitive, where in one section of the game you're just doing one thing consistently.
Yeah, and I guess that's all. Yeah, I think so. They're going to horribly crash again if I set them off, aren't they? Let's just check that out. I guess that's another thing that's, I don't know whether it comes under sort of the controls or the mechanics, but it would be nice if, you know, I don't have to reset the entire level. I could go back to what I had before and then just tweak certain things rather than having to remember how I built things from scratch. But yeah, so I think between a good and an excellent is perfectly suitable for that. In terms of bugs, I mean, we couldn't get their build to run, but that's not really a bug in and of itself. Otherwise, I would say this is a reasonably complex game, and I don't think we've noticed any bugs yet. Which puts it...
No, it seems to all be running.
Yeah, which puts it straight at an excellent.
I think the next bit is to do the level design.
Yes.
Like in the briefing.
So this is interesting. So far we've said, you know, everything has a very clear goal and the risks and rewards are perhaps a bit more confused. I think the ultimate goal for this is still very clear. You know, red house, red car, blue house, blue car. This one definitely has more clear... yeah, risks and rewards is... what am I trying to say here? It has different ways of accomplishing the same goal, and some of them are going to be trickier to pull off than others. So for example, I can try and use fewer tiles, presumably to get a higher score. But it's that ambiguity about what I'm being scored on. Is it the number of attempts it's taken me? Is it the number of tiles I've used? Does each tile have a particular cost? Should I be, you know, for example, if I use more straight tiles than curvy tiles, is that better or worse, or are they all weighted the same? But there is definitely that intent there, at least. So I think I would be inclined to put them sort of towards a good for this.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think like the goals are definitely clear, and I think the risks are clear with like the crashing and like not getting to the right house stuff. But I think it's almost like the rewards, like they're obviously there, but it would be good if they were a bit clearer. But I think I'd agree with you that it's still a good overall, where the other two like bring a lot to it still. I think just like a little bit more information about how the score is being calculated. Like you say, is it better to use less tiles, or is it better to use less curvy tiles, or what's the way to optimize your score, and then working from there.
Yeah.
You actually be able to like change your playstyle a bit, because
this is not going to work, is it?
I don't think we finished it by the blue house.
Oh, you're right. No, that definitely wasn't going to work then. Yeah, it's weird. The fact that they both drive in the middle of the road seems to really stump me every time. Anyway, again, I'm getting sucked into puzzles. Okay, yeah. So I think we hit a good for that. It's like they've definitely got the intent of, you know, if you're a good player, you can solve this puzzle in a better way. But again, it goes back to that information design and feedback. They don't really communicate the way in which I should be trying to solve it. Like we're assuming that it's less tiles is good, but we don't know for sure. Okay, pacing. So it's interesting. So I'm gonna just destroy both of these cars again so that we can skip. I really appreciate that they have put in a level select screen, particularly for puzzle games and for marking coursework and things like that. It is invaluable to be able to skip ahead a little bit just in case I get stuck on something. But yeah, the pacing definitely increases, right? I found the first ones quite easy, and I've been struggling to talk and play for the other ones. Ooh, and no curves. Interesting. And
yeah, like the levels obviously seem to get harder.
Yeah, it's interesting how they're managing the balance, because the tiles aren't changing in complexity other than the first sort of 3 or 4 levels where they introduce, you know, the four-way junction and then the sort of turn. After that, they're doing it purely through the placement of obstacles, which I think is quite good. So I would say, yeah, tension's clearly rising over time, and it's rising in a coherent pattern as well. And do we think it's well balanced? This is the question, and part of it relies on can I solve puzzle? And I would say yes.
I guess without playing through like all 10 levels, it's hard to tell if it's completely well balanced, but I think so far every time you've increased the level that you're on, the difficulty seems to have increased. So that's kind of what you'd expect.
Yeah, I agree. This isn't how I'm meant to solve it, is it? What I could do is... There we go, something like that. Sorry, it's generally a good sign if I sort of stop talking because I'm intent on solving a puzzle, but yeah, I'll try not to get too distracted. Where are we at? Pacing.
So
yeah.
that's the pacing, yeah.
Yeah, so I think they probably hit an excellent for this. I don't think they quite get to the prize worthy because there aren't many variations in the actual sort of way the game plays. So, you know, there's only a limited number of sort of tiles and ways of solving the puzzle. Like, most of it is constrained through the shape of the level rather than the ways in which I'm solving it. That said, I still think it's excellent. Okay, so tutorial. I mean, stumbled a little bit out of the gate by just putting all of the controls on the main menu rather than within that first level. But after that, they actually sort of teach a lot of it through the level design rather than sort of saying, you know, you should place this tile here, now here. They just sort of give the player a limited set of tools, get them to solve a simple puzzle, then a more complex set of tools and get them to solve a more complex puzzle, and they prompt them with, you know, dialogue and text at the right moments to sort of explain what the new elements are. So I think, yeah, they're let down maybe a little bit by that first part, but otherwise actually pretty good.
Yeah, I think if they had kind of introduced the first parts the same way they introduced the four-way junction and the three-way turn, then I think it would be like even better. But the fact that the main parts of like how you actually place things and rotate them were just kind of like put on the main screen. Some people might not have even read that before they started the game.
Yeah. So
like some people would just like start level 1.
So an excellent would be gradual explanation of gameplay and controls, fully aligned with play, and sometimes communicated through level design. And other than that slight hiccup, at the that we've again nitpicked it a lot now, I think it probably hits an excellent. Possibly between a good. What do you think for this?
Yeah, I think I can see like the excellent, especially for like the later tutorial aspects. I guess like part of me might have lent more towards like between a good and an excellent, where they're like the very first and quite important parts weren't tutorialized that amazingly. But
you are probably right there. Okay, I think I agree with that. I think between a good and excellent, and I still think that sort of shows that it is a well done tutorial. But you know, some of the key elements could have been done a bit better. Okay, so next is the core dynamic, which I could take a solid guess at, but let's hear what they said.
They said our game possesses the core dynamic of spatial reasoning. This is because players must think about not only where they're placing the current tile, but also what tiles they can place next. They also need to consider what type of tile they place where, as that and the rotation of the tiles will determine their success. For each level, there are certain configurations of tiles that will result in success. If the player cannot achieve one of these, then they fail and the game over screen will be shown.
Okay, that's probably a slightly more complex explanation of why it's spatial reasoning than I would have gone for, but it's basically, you know, there is a thing at point A and they have to reason through a set of obstacles to get to point B. But yeah, fully agree with their assessment that it is spatial reasoning. Certainly, you know, all of the mechanics build towards that. Yeah, it's almost a case of they've got elements of what I guess you'd call temporal reasoning in it as well, because it's not just the location of things, but it's the location of things at certain points in time. But I think that all comes under that umbrella, really. So a good would be a clear core dynamic that's supported by the primary mechanics. Excellent would be clear core dynamic that's supported by an integrated set of mechanics. And I think, much like when we were talking about the mechanics, you know, they have a good set of mechanics. They maybe could have widened it a little bit better or a little bit more for additional complexity. But certainly I think they're at least between a good and an excellent, again, maybe verging towards an excellent for the core dynamic.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think like
in fact,
there's obviously the different ways you can do it and those aspects of the puzzle, and then I think the score does help as well with like showing that there's multiple ways and like you want the best way kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think we probably say excellent for this then.
Yeah, I think that's where I would be leaning towards.
Alright, brilliant. In which case the last thing is feedback. So what feedback did they get and how have they acted on it?
So they said during the first lab we received a variety of feedback. So I think there's a few pieces they've got here. So the first bit is that they originally had a star-based scoring system. We were recommended to use a different scoring system, one that solidified our core dynamic. We decided to base the scoring system by giving the user a higher score based on the amount of tiles the players had remaining. This means that the player must think more critically about how many tiles they use and if they can create a solution that uses less tiles. These scores are then kept and the highest score in each level is shown on the home screen during some progression to the game.
Interesting. Okay, so it was what we suspected, but it's not really made clear that that is why the score is. I can see why they wanted to do that rather than, you know, stars or something like that. And I think it, again, sort of ties much nicer into the risk versus reward thing. But yeah, unfortunately it wasn't made hugely clear that that was the change. Sorry, so you said they had some other bits of feedback as well.
Yeah. So the next bit is that we also were planning on having a more laid out tutorial guiding the user through step by step. However, we were guided to show not tell when it comes to guiding the player and to let the player mess around with the mechanics. So we listened to this by not explaining what each tile does and by having very simple starting levels to allow the player to develop a good understanding of the mechanics before they arrive at the challenging levels.
And again, I think that was broad, or certainly the intent behind the change was broadly successful. There were some ways they could have improved it that we've already talked about, but I think, yeah, they do the bulk of their tutorializing quite well through the initial setup of each puzzle and the tools they give you, rather than, you know, saying, first you must put this tile here, now press start kind of a thing. They give you just enough explanation to get started, and then sort of let you experiment and learn as you play. So that works quite well. Were there any other bits and pieces?
Yes, they've got, I think it looks like they've got one final bit from the feedback session, and then potentially some play testing feedback. So the next bit was, we also asked what the risk and reward of our game will be, and what is the overarching goal of our game. When at the lab we struggled to answer these questions, so decided to focus on developing the risk and reward for the player, and making sure that the main goal is clear. We developed risk and reward by allowing the player to get a higher score by using less tiles. This develops the reward of a higher score by letting the user use less tiles, which increases the risk of cars crashing into each other, which causes the users to fail the level.
Yeah, I mean, so that's, again, sort of what we said when we were talking about risk and reward, like, definitely a worthwhile way of introducing it, just perhaps not explained as clearly as they could be. So overall, for feedback, I think I would say probably between a satisfactory and a good for this. So they've made a number of changes. Some of them have been successful, some of them have been partly successful. There's definitely sort of ways they could have developed those implementations of the feedback a bit further, but the changes that they've made have had a positive impact.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think they've definitely taken on board what was said. I think maybe just needed to fine tune it a bit more. Try and get it, some aspects of it, a bit closer to like what the feedback was intending, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, which brings us to the end of this game, and it brings us to the end of this video. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again for another video very, very soon. Bye bye.